Here is an uncomfortable question to start with. What if the one thing you are most confident about is actually the thing you understand the least? Not the stuff you already admit you are bad at, not the areas where you openly struggle, the thing you would bet money on, the topic you would argue about at a dinner table without blinking, without a shred of doubt, the subject you have never once questioned because it feels so obvious, so self-evident, so undeniably true. Psychology has a name for why your brain does this to you. And once you understand the mechanism behind it, you will not just start noticing it in other people. You will start noticing it in yourself. And that is the part nobody warns you about. You already know the person this is about. Everyone does. The one who has never once said, "I do not know," in an entire group conversation. The one who gives you directions with total certainty and somehow still gets you lost. The one who reads 3 headlines and is suddenly correcting doctors, economists, and engineers in the comments. We laugh at them. We roll our eyes and move on. But here is the twist. Psychologists have spent decades studying exactly this pattern, and the explanation was never simply, "These people are arrogant." It is something stranger than arrogance, and it is wired into how the human brain works, which means it is not only happening to them, it is happening to all of us quietly in whatever we have not actually gotten good at yet. In 1999, 2 psychologists at Cornell University, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, ran a set of experiments that ended up naming an entire phenomenon. They tested people on logic, grammar, and even their sense of humor, then asked each person to guess how they had ranked compared to everyone else. The results were published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, and the pattern held across every single test. People who scored in the bottom quarter, whose actual performance put them around the 12th percentile, guessed they had scored around the 62nd percentile, comfortably above average. Meanwhile, the people who actually did score near the top rated themselves lower than they deserved. This gap between how good someone truly is and how good they believe they are is what we now call the Dunning-Kruger effect. And it might be one of the most quietly destructive patterns in human psychology because the people living inside it never feel like they are living inside it. That is the whole trap. Here is why it happens, and it is not because unskilled people are lazy or careless. It is because the same skill you need to perform well at something is the same skill you need to judge good performance in that field. If you do not understand grammar, you cannot spot bad grammar, including your own. If you do not understand a subject deeply, you do not have the tools to notice the gaps in your own knowledge. Competence and the ability to evaluate competence come from the exact same place in the brain. So when someone is missing a skill, they lose 2 things at once: the skill itself and the ability to see that it is missing. Researchers sometimes call this a double curse. You do not know, and you do not know that you do not know. It is not a character flaw. It is closer to a system error. The exact tool required to catch the mistake is the same tool that is missing. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus understood this centuries ago. He wrote that it is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. When you are convinced you already understand something, you close the door to actual understanding. You stop listening. You stop questioning. You stop growing. And the more certain you are, the more likely it is that you are trapped in this very pattern. You can spot this pattern everywhere once you know what you are looking for. In relationships, it is the partner who is convinced they are a great listener while constantly interrupting. In friend groups, it is the person handing out confident advice about love despite a long trail of relationships that all ended the same way. Online, it is the anonymous commenter with 3 minutes of reading who somehow sounds more certain than the expert who spent a decade on the subject. None of these people believe they are uninformed. From the inside, confidence and correctness feel like the exact same sensation. That is what makes this bias so hard to catch. It is not stupidity the way we usually joke about it. It is a quiet, invisible gap between what someone knows and what they think they know, and no alarm ever goes off to tell them the gap exists. The Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote that a person is never so ignorant as when he is sure of himself. That is the heart of this pattern. Certainty, when unearned, is not a sign of knowledge. It is a sign of blindness. And the most dangerous part is that you cannot see your own blindness from the inside. Now, here is where this gets uncomfortable, because so far this has sounded like a video about other people. That one loud coworker, That one relative, that one stranger in your replies. So ask yourself this instead. Is there an area of your life right now where you feel completely certain and you have genuinely never tested that certainty against someone who actually knows the subject? Parenting advice you give without hesitation. Financial opinions you state like established fact. A skill at work you assume you have mastered simply because no one has corrected you yet. The unsettling part of this research is not that some people are overconfident. It is that overconfidence never feels like overconfidence from the inside. It feels like just being right. And here is the detail almost nobody expects. The most skilled people in a room are often the quietest precisely because they are aware of how much they still do not know, while the least skilled person is usually the one dominating the conversation. That imbalance is also why arguments with confidently wrong people feel so exhausting. You are not just disagreeing on facts. You are negotiating with someone who has no internal signal telling them to slow down. So, how do you actually tell real confidence apart from this blind spot? One signal. Genuine expertise usually comes with specific doubt. Experts can tell you precisely where they might be wrong. The blind spot version of confidence is vague, total, and turns defensive the moment it is questioned. A second signal. If you have never once changed your mind on a topic you feel sure about, that is not proof you are right. It might just mean you have never let in enough information to be proven wrong. The fix is not to doubt yourself constantly, or you just build a different trap out of chronic insecurity. The real fix is smaller and far more uncomfortable. Get genuinely curious about the exact spots where you feel most certain, and ask yourself what would have to be true for you to be wrong there. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. And part of that power is the ability to examine your own thoughts, to question your own certainty, to hold your beliefs lightly enough that you can revise them when new evidence arrives. That is not weakness. That is wisdom. That is the mark of a mind that is truly free. When we look at this pattern through the lens of female psychology, the implications are profound. Women are often socialized to be more attuned to social cues, to read the room, to question their own perceptions. This can make them more susceptible to self-doubt, but it can also make them more aware of their own blind spots. Men, on the other hand, are often socialized to project confidence, even when they are not sure. This can lead to a greater tendency toward the Dunning-Kruger effect. But the Stoic approach is not about gender. It is about character. It is about the willingness to be wrong. It is about the courage to say, "I do not know," when you do not know. And it is about the humility to keep learning, even when you think you have already arrived. When a woman rejects a man who is overconfident, it is often not because she does not like confidence. It is because she can sense that the confidence is hollow. She can sense that he is performing certainty rather than actually knowing. And that performance is exhausting to be around. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus wrote that we should not be ashamed to learn what we do not know. And that is the key. The man who is willing to learn, who is willing to admit his gaps, who is willing to be wrong, is the man who is truly confident. Not the man who pretends to know everything. The woman who is worth your time will respect the man who can say, "I do not know," more than the man who pretends to have all the answers. There is a reason why overconfidence is so often a turn-off. It signals a lack of self-awareness. It signals that the person is not paying attention to their own limitations. And that is a dangerous quality in a partner. If a man cannot see his own blind spots, how can he be trusted to navigate the complexities of a relationship? How can he be trusted to listen, to grow, to change? The Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote that a good person is not someone who has never made mistakes, but someone who has learned from them. And learning from mistakes requires the ability to see them. It requires the humility to admit when you are wrong. It requires the courage to change your mind. And that is what makes someone truly attractive. Not the certainty of being right, but the willingness to be wrong and learn from it. There is a story about a man who was considered the wisest in all of Athens. When the oracle told him that he was the wisest man, he did not believe it. He went around questioning everyone he met, trying to find someone wiser than himself. And what he discovered was that most people thought they knew things they did not actually know. They were confident in their ignorance. And that is when he realized why the oracle had called him wise. Because he knew that he did not know. He was aware of his own limitations. He was willing to be wrong. And that willingness, that humility, is the foundation of true wisdom. That is the Stoic approach to knowledge. Not certainty, but curiosity. Not arrogance, but humility. Not the need to be right, but the willingness to learn. When you apply this to relationships, it changes everything. The man who is willing to say, "I do not know," is the man who can truly listen. The man who is willing to admit he was wrong is the man who can truly grow. The man who is willing to learn is the man who can truly connect. And the woman who is worth your time will respect that. She will not be turned off by your admission of uncertainty. She will be drawn to it, because it signals that you are real, that you are not performing, that you are not trying to impress her with a false version of yourself. And that is the most attractive thing you can offer. Not your certainty, but your willingness to be wrong. Not your answers, but your questions. Not your confidence, but your curiosity. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus wrote that no great thing is created suddenly, and the same is true of wisdom. It is not something you achieve in a single moment. It is something you build over time, through the accumulation of small acts of humility, small admissions of uncertainty, small steps toward learning. If a small, specific memory just surfaced while you were watching this, or a moment you were completely sure of something and later found out you were not, that is not embarrassing. That is actually rare, because most people never catch it happening in real time. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If you are constantly thinking about how right you are, how certain you are, how much you know, your soul becomes dyed with those colors. You become rigid, closed off, unable to learn. But if you are constantly thinking about what you do not know, what you could learn, what you might be wrong about, your soul becomes dyed with those colors. You become open, curious, capable of growth. And that openness is what makes you magnetic. Not your certainty, your curiosity. Not your answers, your questions. Not your confidence, your humility. So the next time you feel that flash of total certainty about someone else or about yourself, pause just long enough to ask the question we opened with. What if this is exactly the thing you understand the least?